Well, good morning and thank you for joining us, or good afternoon. Appreciate having you here. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes to let people sign in, and we'll get started very, very shortly. Okay, so thank you again. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate your patience. My name is Robert Phipps, Deputy Director with Fresno Council of Governments, administering the Regional Early Action Planning 2.0, or REAP 2.0 as it's known. And this is the second, actually it's the third of 4 public meetings that we'll be hosting on the REAP 2.0 methodology and the application process and scoring criteria. With me joining us today, Brenda Vinadal, Ophelia Bundes, Denise Flores, and Jake Martinez from our staff helping to run this. So why don't we just go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. So we'll begin with a kind of a quick overview of some of the material that we covered last time in our last stakeholder and public meetings. 13.6 million, we get right to the point. This is what the Fresno region can expect to receive approximately in regional early action planning funding. Again, this is REAP 2.0 is distinguished from REAP 1.0, which Fresno COG is also administering on behalf of the entire San Joaquin Valley. So this funding goes, as you probably already know, towards state housing goals and climate commitments through a strengthened partnership among the state, its region, and local entities. Next slide. So 5 major goals that REAP 2.0 works to accomplish not necessarily in this order, but to help accelerate infill housing, reduce vehicle miles traveled, affirmatively further fair housing, increase the housing supply for affordability at all levels, and help implement adopted regional and local plans to achieve this goal. So for us, that specifically refers to our regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. This funding is intended to help implement the strategies that are discussed in that long range transportation plan and its accompanying sustainable community strategy going forward. So next slide, please. A little bit of background. So this was established under AB 140 as part of the 2021 California Comeback Plan. The state budget builds on REAP 1.0, which again was in the San Joaquin Valley. Fresno COG is also administering, but whose focus for REAP 1 was primarily on planning efforts, which is probably the biggest distinction between REAP 1 and REAP 2. With REAP 2, there's a much greater focus on actual implementation, and then REAP 2 expands the REAP program generally by integrating housing and climate goals, allowing for broader infrastructure investments. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the hallmarks of REAP 2.0 is the significant beneficial impact. We're going to talk more about that, that each project or applicant must demonstrate that all proposed uses advance the REAP program goals and objectives and meet the definition of transformative planning and implementation activity. And so again, that is kind of the key term for REAP 2.0 is transformative or transformational, that provides a quote significant beneficial impact. And so we kind of define that further down here, where we talk about those impacts are intended to lead to substantial changes in land use patterns and travel behaviors. So this is not, as we have said on several occasions now, this is not gap financing for a project, you know, a multi-unit project that just needs a little bit of help. We have to be able to demonstrate the regional benefit and, you know, perhaps use as a model, or the project itself has to have this significant beneficial benefit for the entire region. So that the way that is measured, another big hallmark of REAP 2.0 is the metrics that are used to measure that significant benefit. And so that can be some sort of rates of change, a magnitude of impact relative to variables or targets, a proportion of need achieved, or impact relative to past trends, policies, and practices. So this is where our region has a great degree of flexibility, is defining what those significant impacts are. The applications and the projects will simply need to reflect, you know, the trend or baseline that is being changed as the result of funding. Next slide, please. So some of the targets include, but are not limited to, actual housing units, benefiting housing, households by income group, public spaces, community amenities, of course, VMT, vehicle miles traveled, reduction goals or targets, greenhouse gas emission reductions or targets, regional or local equity policies, and programs that are included in the adopted RTP SCS. So again, not a comprehensive list, but you know, some examples of projects that would be eligible for it. Go ahead, next slide. So like we said, the applications must demonstrate this clear evidence that there is a nexus between each proposed use and the REAP objectives, using these metrics, targets, outputs, and other units of measurement that are evaluated as described by the guidelines, which we discussed in a little greater extent in our last round of meetings. Next slide. So what's different today for this workshop and going forward from the last time is that we now have a proposed methodology based on the input that we received from the last time, as well as the guidelines that the state has issued for REAP 2.0. You know, some of those guidelines you see, well, excuse me, you see here at the top, the web link to get a copy of that proposed methodology, which includes proposed scoring criteria and you know, attempts to address the three objectives that each project has to satisfy, which is in accelerating infill development that facilitates housing supply choice and affordability, affirmatively furthering fair housing, and reducing vehicle miles traveled. So the scoring process obviously determines the degree to which each respective project satisfies each objective. Next slide, please. So some of the questions that we're trying to address within that methodology, you know, under each category: does the project accelerate infill development near jobs and other key destinations to support housing choice? Is the project at an infill site? Does it have affordability components that serve low to moderate income households? And is the project for affordable housing development programs, which may involve pre-development costs that accelerate supply of long-term housing for lower and moderate income households? So to be clear, not all REAP 2.0 money necessarily has to be spent in terms of implementation or construction, but you know, we do have to be able, again, to show that nexus with regard to any planning activities that we intend to undertake. So planning is an eligible use, generally speaking, for REAP 2.0. However, the guidance that has been conveyed to Fresno COG has been to kind of err on the side of implementation as opposed to planning. Doesn't mean we can't have planning projects, but that this round of funding is primarily intended for implementation. Next slide. So with regard to affirmatively furthering fair housing, is the project materially consistent or inconsistent with AFFH? Is geographic equity addressed after initial scoring? Does the project support regional and local efforts to work toward ensuring all people have full and equal access to opportunities, enabling them to lead healthy lives? So you can see here, these are some of the key questions that we'll be asking of all applications as they are submitted as we prepare for the scoring process. Next slide. In terms of reducing VMT, is the project consistent with the sustainable community strategy? Do we have land use planning policies and investment strategies by infill development that facilitates housing supply, choice, and affordability, and is served by existing and planned expansions of a multimodal transportation system? Transportation planning policies, investment strategies that increase travel options. Again, so several questions related to the major goals of the program that each applicant and application project application will go through. Next slide. So the primary factors or criteria that are come under consideration that we have used to develop the initial methodology that we're presenting here today comes directly from the REAP 2.0 guidelines and directly informs the REAP 2.0 objectives in the scoring matrix. So those include housing element compliance, transformative planning and implementation activities. And under that, we ask the questions, does the project provide for housing planning or infrastructure investments supporting infill housing and other actions that enable meeting housing goals? While at the same time reducing VMT, accelerating infill development, supporting residents through realizing multimodal communities, shifting travel behavior through reducing driving and increasing transit ridership. So, right, what's the problem? You can see it's all spelled out here very clearly. The REAP 2.0 program doesn't ask a lot, but it's going to be a hurdle for many of our projects in the Valley, given the constraints with which we're dealing, the kinds of projects that would be eligible for this program. Next slide. So with regard to public outreach, did the outreach arise or go through a public process to solicit community input? That's what you're here for today. If this is a planning project, does the scope of work include a public process with regard to benefiting disadvantaged population, the degree to which a project may target disadvantaged and historically underserved communities to benefit those communities? Next slide. Under the heading of significant beneficial impacts, does the project lead to substantial changes in land use patterns and travel behaviors? Again, as demonstrated by the metrics we discussed earlier, a rate of change compared to the baseline, the magnitude or of impact relative to variables or targets, the proportion of need achieved, or the impact relative to past trends, policies, and practices. Next slide, please. And then we have the California planning priorities. Again, largely dealing with the extent to which projects under consideration address infill development and equity through, in this, for one example, rehabilitating, maintaining, and improving existing infrastructure that supports infill development, or appropriate use of and redevelopment of previously developed land served by transit, streets, water, sewer, and other essential services. Does the project protect environmental and agricultural resources by preserving and enhancing the state's most valuable natural resources? And you can see the kinds of natural resources we're talking about here: farms, parks, trails, green belts, and landscapes with locally unique features. Next slide. So this is the proposed scoring and weighting table that we're bringing to you today. We're asking the questions, or we will be asking the questions: do we have this right as you understand the program? Again, all of this methodology, including this table and the scoring matrix, is available right now on our website under our REAP webpage. But you can see that it considers the proposed scoring criteria, considers the objectives, the primary factors, and then as well as the secondary factors, which we didn't talk much about, but that every project shares in terms of scope and budget and risk assessment. So I'll give you a couple of moments to take a look at that. And then we will go ahead and move on into the next slide. So this is where we begin our survey, and we're going to ask you a series of questions via a Zoom poll to see whether or not we're getting this right. But perhaps before I do that, we should open it up for any questions, clarifying points, so that we're clear that you understand what it is that we're going to be asking of you. Basically, how did we do with the methodology? Are there changes that you would like to see made? Different weighting of the elements. This has the table that you just saw was developed with HCD support. So we are confident that that particular scoring rubric would make the cut, if you will. It should pass scrutiny among the 4 state partners who are developing REAP 2.0. So let me just pause here for a moment and ask the question if there are any questions or comments that you'd like to provide right now before we begin our survey. Okay, I see a raised hand. Do we want to unmute? Let's see, here we go. Okay, Ms. Garcia, please.
Okay, good afternoon, Robert. Thank you. My question is, where in the scoring do you give points for housing affordability? I saw infill housing and affirmatively furthering fair housing, but I'm wondering where the affordability is captured in the scoring matrix.
Can you go back one slide, Brenda? And we can look at that. Okay. So you see number 4 under primary factors, benefit to disadvantaged populations.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of them. But another one would be affirmatively furthering fair housing. If you are aware of the latest state requirements regarding this component of the new housing element updates, that is a big consideration within that each jurisdiction must demonstrate as part of its housing element update. So those would probably be the 2 biggest points that address your question. But I mean, others indirectly do so as well. The housing element compliance, the significant beneficial impacts, and the California planning priorities among them.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions at this point? Like I said, we want to make sure that we think we know our audience based on who attended the workshops in the last round. Primarily people who were in the know. We had I don't think anyone who joined our previous workshops was completely new to the housing arena. So we know that we're speaking to a pretty educated audience here at this point. We just want to make sure that there's no ambiguity going forward before we start asking the questions. Yes, I have Mukasa Kazala.
2 points. I'm very new to the housing arena, so I'm just learning. Also, looking at your scoring weighing table, looks like a lot of items in the objectives. Actually, a lot of items in the primary factors are subsets of the objectives.
Correct.
So somebody can rack up a whole bunch of points under one of the objectives, and looks like it is too much weight is given to the objectives instead of just this the individual elements.
Well, and the reason for that is again that transformative. You know, we're looking at the I think that the answer to that question or that point is that we come back to the transformative transformational requirement that is not explicitly stated, as you point out in this matrix, in this table, but is contained in those objectives in terms of achieving those objectives, which is why they are weighted higher. Because you know, like I said, the benchmark is actually going to be pretty high. You know, that to some degree, and there will be some flexibility there, but to some degree, the winning proposals will have to hit each one of these objectives. It's not, you know, it's not a matter of focusing on one or two of them. It's all three. That there needs to be weight, at least to some extent, given to all three metrics. And so that is why these do weigh so very heavily as opposed to the primary factors. But the primary factors within our proposal are, at the moment at least, are kind of the types of programs that we'll be looking at funding. At least initially, we expect to have refinements that are requested of us from HCD and the California Air Resources Board. I should have mentioned this earlier. The Strategic Growth Council, all these state agencies, 4 different state agencies that will be reviewing our application and ultimately our the project list that you know, we provide to them for funding. And so that is why, yes, you're absolutely right. The objectives are weighted so much more heavily than the primary factors are. Go ahead.
One more question. One of my interest in this is an applicant can pay a consultant to write an application that hits on all these points and scores high. The question is, we read in the Fresno B about some communities which actually are not very accommodating to fair housing. Is that a factor in for your consideration in awarding these? In making your recommendations? Those communities which have a history of resisting fair housing, do you take that into consideration?
I think that that's certainly a possibility. I don't know that we have discussed that at this point, but it is one of the reasons why you know, we anticipate that any project that would be funded would have to be put together, you know, in conjunction with the jurisdiction in which it's going, or you know, or be submitted by that jurisdiction directly. One of the things that we are certainly considering is funneling, you know, all applications through their home jurisdictions, or all projects through their home jurisdictions, to make sure that there is that support. And now this another important point to your question is that this is not the end of our outreach. This is the second round of outreach in a very broad sense with regard again to the methodology, the scoring rubric that we're proposing to use. But as the program progresses through the next couple of years, we certainly would not want to make the mistake of funding a project that the community doesn't want. And so, or that has some sort of likelihood of failure, which is why, under the secondary factors, you see the project risk assessment as a consideration. So this is, certainly not the end of our outreach. Right now, we don't have any funding from our state partners at this point to conduct real heavy outreach, which is why we're doing this the way that we're doing it. We're working to meet a December 31st deadline, but the funding, initial funding to the tune of about 5% of the available money, roughly $600,000, has been approved, and we are anticipating that funding, hopefully within the next couple of months. And that is where we will be doing more extensive outreach that will probably get into specific projects.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so are there any other hands up or questions or anything like that? Okay, so if not, let's go ahead and start our survey process, please. Move into the survey. Next slide, there we go. So the first question, and we're asking this formally and both formally and informally. We will take your votes on this, but also want your feedback. Does the proposed methodology and scoring criteria properly account for REAP 2.0 primary factors and objectives? Should probably already also be in that slide. Does the criteria that you've just seen address the REAP 2.0 factors and primary factors and objectives as you understand them? So I think we have a Zoom poll, right, that we're going to launch. And so we're giving you kind of some broad choices, yes, no, or sort of. And if you choose sort of, then we're hoping that you can tell us where we're falling short, and we will try and make a point of accounting for that in our methodology before it's submitted. So right now we have just under half of our people have responded. We're going to give it another minute or so before we close the polling. So we're hoping that you'll give us your input, please. That's what we're looking for. Does the methodology and scoring criteria account for the primary factors and objectives? And Ms. Espinoza, I do see your hand. We'll get to you as soon as the poll is over here. Give it one more minute. Anybody else? We've got 8 of 13. We can do better than that. It's only 61%. Please give us your vote one way or the other. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and end the poll and show the results. So we have 78% of those who voted, which was 9 of 13, saying yes, that this is sounds like the correct methodology, the correct scoring criteria. But we do have 2 people who say yes, sort of. They don't say no, they kind of. So maybe it can be a little better. And we're happy to address those points. I do see Evelyn Espinoza. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Robert. I just wanted to clarify that I'm not voting.
Yeah.
I didn't want you to.
Oh,
Okay,
that's right.
that's it.
Of course. That's right. I'm sorry. Thank
No,
you.
no, thank you very much. That's
Very
it.
good. Okay, so for the two who did say sort of, which I interpret as maybe that could be better. If you would like to tell us how, what you think could be improved, we're happy to listen. So please just raise your hand, or if you want to share. Oh, there is no chat or Q&A function, so you'll have to talk to the group. Yes, go ahead, Brenda.
If they just want to raise their hand.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, if you would like to comment on what you mean by sort of, then we're happy to hear your comment. Now's the time. Anyone? Last chance. Okay, well, please don't, please do share if you have concerns or questions. We're happy to answer those. Now is the time, but we will go ahead and move on to our next question. So this one is, does the methodology allow for the kinds of projects you desire in your community? And this gets at the last question that was asked. Are these, do we anticipate that these projects are going to be welcomed? What problems do we foresee? Will there be some degree of community resistance? And the extent to which that may or may not play a role, because we are fully aware that that has and probably will continue to occur, as projects are proposed, and especially affordable housing projects. Well aware of the history of resistance to that. So it's a very germane question. But with regard to what REAP 2.0 is trying to achieve, and the kinds of projects that you would like to see or believe should be within your community, does this methodology get at those? Does it allow for those? So let's go ahead and throw up the Zoom poll. Probably could use a better phrase. Put up the Zoom poll. There we go. And please let us know what you think on this one. Give a couple of minutes to respond. Okay, we're just under half of our participants who have voted, and I do remember, Evelyn, thank you for that point, because I did see a couple of names that I recognize from outside of our region who I'm sure are choosing not to vote, which is perfectly understandable. So we had 9 the last time. Right now we're at 7. Hoping to get a couple more responses before we close this question. Does the methodology allow for the kinds of projects that you desire in your community? So last call, going once, going twice. All right, sold. Let's go ahead and end the poll and show the results, report out. Okay, so as you can see, of the 7 people who answered, 6 say yes, this does allow for the kinds of projects that they're wanting to see. One response is sort of, and we invite that individual to speak and let us know if there's an issue that we can address in the methodology, because now's the time. So just raise your hand. Aha, we have Morgan Wright. And you can unmute. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's not necessarily that these aren't projects that the community desires, but more that on the timeline of REAP for some of these smaller communities, reducing VMT is going to be really difficult.
Right.
Because it's so dependent on transit, which they don't really have any control over.
Right, right. And you know, thank you, Morgan, for your point. And we are aware of that. We know that our smaller communities are at a considerable disadvantage. You know, I was being a little sarcastic earlier, if you didn't pick up on it, you know, about the kinds of objectives and, you know, the hurdles that you know, our development community and our jurisdictions will be facing in qualifying for these funds, because as you point out, they are very heavily transit dependent. I mean, that seems like a natural consequence. But these are the guidelines and the rules that the state has established. So we are just following those. Again, this comes directly from the guidelines that were issued about the REAP program, which is why we're pretty confident that this will pass muster. Our initial, or not our initial application, this is actually our full application. So there will be, clearly there will be refinements to that going on, we anticipate, for months, because we don't have projects yet. We don't know what the projects are going to be. We have no idea what kinds of projects or where they'll be located. But we do recognize that, you know, the infill and the transit component put our smaller jurisdictions at a competitive disadvantage to some extent. You know, we will work with that to the extent that we can to kind of demonstrate, because one of the values is also geographic equity. And so, you know, we will be looking at that. But yes, you're absolutely right. It is a high hurdle. Are there other points on this question? And Morgan, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So if there are other points or questions, we're happy to hear those. Just raise your hand. Okay, and if not, then why don't we go ahead and move on to our next question? So again, this actually should probably have included both the REAP objectives and the primary factors. We're, for the purposes of our December 31st deadline, we're kind of focusing on the primary factors as being areas of expenditure, if you will. But this question is inclusive of both. It's intended to be. Is the scoring and weighting rubric appropriate to the primary factors and objectives of REAP? And so kind of same format here, yes or no, or kind of. And if you have thoughts on how we can improve upon that process, we're all ears. So why don't we have the poll launched, please? So is the scoring and weighting rubric appropriate to the primary factors and objectives? And we'll give this a couple of minutes. Hopefully we can get back up to the 9 responses we had earlier. Okay, we're kind of lagging behind, so we're hoping to get a few more before we need to close this out. We do not have half of our participants. Yeah, there we go. Okay, we've got half. Couple more. Please let us know. Give it a few more seconds. All right, going once, going twice, and let's go ahead and end the poll and share out the results. So we had 8 of you respond to this question. Again, kind of yes and sort of split, 75-25. So we appreciate your input, and we do want to reach out at this time to those who may not be entirely comfortable with the methodology, the rubrics, the process, any of that. We're happy to discuss. So for the folks who say that we need to adjust that scoring and weighting, how would we do that? What are you recommending? And we have Ms. Milrod. Please go right ahead. Patience. Go ahead and unmute. Patience, you're available to speak, please. Happy to hear what you have to say.
This is Shelley. I'm not sure if I'm coming up as Patience, but I just wanted to comment, just a comment that it would be helpful when you're doing the poll, actually maybe change the slide to the scoring weighting so that we can kind of see the scoring factor. So that might be helpful for us while we're doing the polls. I just kind of felt like I think maybe needing a little bit more time to look at, I just felt a little earlier from the comment that the gentleman mentioned that the weight is a little heavy on the objective side versus the primary factor. And so would like to kind of really explore a little bit more on that. So that was just, I think I just need a little bit more time to analyze that.
Sure, absolutely. And again, the methodology and the rubrics are available on the website. They have been now for a couple, 3 weeks, I think. So you're free to go and grab those and go through it with fine-tooth comb, because that's what we are proposing to submit along with our application, at least initially, to the state. Like I said, we know for a fact that because the state's application is looking for project-specific information, we cannot provide that at this time, because our process, we've been waiting on the funding to really get deep into the public outreach and have not had that be forthcoming. So we wanted to make sure to get something to the state by the deadline, but we know that there's going to be it's going to be kind of an iterative process that ultimately ends with the list of projects that we're actually proposing to fund. So we still think there's lots of time to do that, but there are deadlines associated with these funds. I believe it's 2026 is when these funds have to be expended, June, as I recall. So we're not trying to dally, but we do want to allow for adequate time for consideration of the process and the projects. So thank you for your comment. We absolutely will note that, and we'll see if we can't. That's a very good point. Brenda and Denise, perhaps we can work on a way to display both simultaneously. We can bring the rubric around to the question, to have it share the slide with the question. That's my fault. So I appreciate the comment. But we will try and address that going forward. We do have 2 more meetings on this methodology. Are there others who wish to comment at this point? Yes, I see Keith. Ms. Birchgold, please. Go right ahead, sir.
Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Good. Just two real quick questions. But first of all, thank you very much for doing this. Number two, where on the website are all these REAP materials? I'm just kind of looking and I'm not seeing them just handily available. So maybe you can highlight that before you end. And then are the eligible entities for applying for these grants going to be the same as REAP number one?
Yeah, that's something that we haven't really discussed in a lot of depth. But I mean, in theory, yes. The question that we're still going to have to answer on our side is whether, as Fresno COG, when it comes down to the contracting portion of this, the actual contracting between grantor or grantee and sub-grantee, is whether we're going to be comfortable working with individual organizations, for example, that we know will be applying, as opposed to working through our jurisdictions, which we are more comfortable with, and we're more doing it that way. We're more assured that the project would have greater support. There's not going to be a question of any kind of running into loggerheads between the developer and the jurisdiction, for example, whether it's quite frankly, whether it's a planning project or a implementation, an actual construction project. So right now I kind of lean toward the notion that our regional application will include a provision that the application has to be submitted through a jurisdiction. But we're certainly open to hearing other approaches on that, other thoughts. But that would seem to help guarantee that there's a broad support in the community to have that project go forward, because it would also have to be vetted at the local level in addition to our REAP process. And then with regard to the first question about where on the website, as I recall, Brenda, it's under planning, right? It's
Under planning and Fresno COG housing.
right. So
Plan-
FresnoCog.org, if you go to FresnoCog.org, and I think it's the furthest tab along the top, the furthest one to the left is planning, right? Yeah.
Right.
And then housing
Got it.
planning.
Got it.
You got it? Okay, great.
Got it. And then just one more comment.
Sure, of course.
So I really, really want to encourage you to expand your comfort zone. We're working with about 20 CBOs that are getting into affordable housing. I think they represent strong equity in the community, and increasingly they're representing capabilities, not to do 100-unit projects, certainly, but to contribute to solving this housing crisis. So I also think that there's an assumption made about the efficacy of the jurisdictions, which I'm not sure is true in all cases. So I would want to raise that up too, that it's entirely possible the community can be supportive of a lot of projects. The jurisdictions may not be able to appreciate them or may not find them interesting to them, and the community may very well support them broadly if given the chance. The community, not the jurisdiction. So
Right.
I would
Fair point.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
we do have a plan. We had a plan to reach out to the groups that you're working with specifically. We just have not gotten any of the funding that was to be provided for all of that public outreach. So we're waiting on that and the contract to do so. There will be opportunities to outreach as we move forward, even on specific project types. So you will be hearing from us. We had planned to do it already, but we're waiting on the funding. So
I appreciate you guys. I think you know that. And so whatever you can do, I would say just really consider some sleeve of the money for maybe smaller entities that aren't jurisdictions. The other thing I would ask is that we have some major public institutions, community college districts, universities that want to get into this housing game. And I would definitely include them in your eligibility list, because they are potentially a lot of partners for us in major projects in infill areas and things like that. They're beginning to realize they need to make those investments to secure their student base.
Right. Yes. Yeah. No disagreement whatsoever from us on that, Keith. It is a question of administration, and also, this this methodology and metrics will have to be supported by our board. You know, everything that ultimately that we submit to the state will have to have, you know, at least a majority board support following our methods and rules for voting. And of course, our board is comprised of, you know, the jurisdictions and the county, the individual cities in the county. So, so that we keep that at the top of our mind as well. But I do completely understand what you're saying, and I do appreciate that it's not always true that a community, as we're calling it, is in complete alignment with its jurisdiction or with its elected officials. So we will
Indeed. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for recognizing that.
Absolutely. Very good. Are there other questions or comments? No, you bet. Thank you. Are there other questions or comments? Okay, if not, we can go on, I think. So in this case, and I don't know that we need the Zoom poll for this one, because this is again kind of intended to generate a general discussion. What other criteria or considerations that will meet the goals and objectives should be considered for our methodology and scoring process? What's missing? What is it that we're not thinking of? What is it that we're not capturing that is allowable under the guidelines as you've read them yourself, or you know, have seen through our depictions of them? What are we not thinking of? And happy to take any questions on that, or any comments, thoughts. Is there something we can do better? No comments at all? Nobody? Keith. Go right ahead, sir.
Yep. Just reiterating my other comments. I think those are areas for improvement, reducing
Oh. Yikes, sorry. Go ahead, sir. We lost you, Keith. I'm sorry. Keith, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Yeah, got you now.
Okay, I just want to reiterate what I said before. I think we need to expand the number of eligible applicants to be more equity framed. I think other institutions besides jurisdictions are very competent in this regard, and they're being recognized by the state. You can see all the student housing money coming into our community college districts and things like that. And I think this would be appropriate in our universities. And I think CBOs are a source of equity in producing, you know, both policy and actual housing results. So anyway, I'd really like to reiterate, just broadening the base of eligibility, even if it's a carved out piece of the total grant, where you are really demonstrating, you know, reaching into these different areas of capacity.
Absolutely. Now, to be clear, I do want to perhaps clarify one thing, which is that the conversation we've been having on that topic so far really relates to refining the application process on a regional basis going forward. So we don't actually have the application developed yet, right? Because we're looking for state approval to do that. And like I said, that's going to be kind of an iterative process. First, they have to accept the methodology and the scoring criteria that we're proposing. But as we're developing the actual application, the regional application that Fresno COG will be using to score, that absolutely does come into play, and we will certainly keep that in mind going forward.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, are there any other comments before we close out? Please don't be shy. Okay, well, seeing none, next slide, please. I think this is Oh, okay, good. Yeah, so we do have the timeline. This is continued over from our previous workshop or workshop series. So this is kind of a rough timeline of what we anticipate. We don't know how much play there is in this. We do know that as I've mentioned a couple of times, for December 31st, that is the deadline for the full application, which in this case, I think originally the idea was that we were going to have, you know, the actual projects available, but that's gone by the wayside. The state understands because of the delays in funding. So now we're looking at program policies, the guidelines and the framework, which is what you've seen here today, what we've been talking about, and what is available on our website for your further review. We anticipate over the next at least couple of months, possibly into the spring, application revisions and augmentations, which eventually will lead to projects, you know, that will be submitted back to the state for consideration. And then probably sometime in late spring, early summer, hope to have approval of the final, no kidding, final projects and application. And then sometime summer or fall, we would receive a master funding agreement that we would sign with the state, and we could commence the work toward the end of 2023. Excuse me. So that is what we believe is going to happen, more or less, but we will certainly keep you apprised as developments occur. Next slide, please. So we will have one more public meeting tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. If you'd like to join us again, if you think of anything else that you'd like to submit, of course, you can also submit comments directly to us through our website. But there will be another bite at the apple tomorrow night at 5:30. And we also will be posting these sessions on our YouTube page with links on to our project website or program website. Next slide. Very good. So that's it. My contact information is right there for you. I know I see a lot of familiar names, so I know many of you already. But again, if you think of questions or concerns that you might have, feel free to drop me a line, give me a call. We do have to submit this by December 31st, so the timeline is a little tight, but there is still time. And we appreciate your presence today, your interest. And we know that together we will make this a very successful program. So thank you so much for your attendance, and we hope to see you tomorrow night. If not, please accept our wishes for the happiest of holidays to each of you and your lovely families. Take care. Thank you.